Hi, Chris Searles here. I am executive editor at allcreation.org, and I am the director at biointegrity.net, which produces All Creation. And I botched the intro to our event last night, so that's why I'm making this video. I want to welcome you to our conversation on Pathways of Teshuvah with eco-psychologist Pesach Chananiah and special guest Marcus Carr. Dr. Chananiah is a community organizer in Nevada, working to bring unions together on issues and opportunities around cleaner energy. And Mr. Carr is a youth mentor in North Minneapolis, where he's program director for Youth Farm, which is helping kids in that part of the country get out of the traumas of institutionalized poverty and racism in America through urban gardening. And that is an extremely brief description of what Marcus does. He is literally saving lives with the work he does with youth. And that process has everything to do with engaging in nature and returning to a more native sense of self to break out of the paradigms of institutionalized poverty. And as Marcus will tell you later in this interview, of being black in America today. Marcus's urban gardening team just won a $750,000 grant to expand, and his Minneapolis Food Justice Council, which he was appointed to co-lead by the mayor of Minneapolis after a 6-year process, just won city council approval yesterday for joining the Milan Food Justice Pact. And this movement, this policy change in Minneapolis will empower expansion of local food production across the region and even across the state of Minnesota. Marcus's approach to leadership is as a friend and as a builder and as a grower. He builds balanced relationships, whether it's with the kids or just as a gardener. He's working on balance and relationship. And this is because of his nature knowledge. And Pesach, the author of this breakthrough paper, he grew up as a Jewish American without a strong connection to his Judaism. And so as a PhD psychologist with a focus on how ecology and landscapes define our concept of reality, the space that we're in, as that person, he then went and explored his ancestral Jewish identity and discovered that indigeneity, which you could define as living with a sense of sacred relationship to the other life in this giant ecosystem, the biodiversity of a given landscape or place, that is embedded in the texts, the ancient Jewish texts, in the identity of the ancient Jewish culture. And of course, cutting all the way sort of to the chase of why we're having this conversation, why it's so important, that's the culture that created the first 5 books of the Bible and a lot of things for Western civilization. What Pesach is showing us, and what Marcus's work is showing us, Pesach's personal experience as well, is that reconnecting to the land life, this is our best asset for a whole number of non-environmental solutions. My focus in biointegrity is why that's the best asset for environmental solutions. But what these guys can tell you is that this reconnection to nature is healing traumas and helping people grow into greater relationship with the other people around them and the rest of the so-called environment, this reality that we share of this life support system that we have named nature, which, by the way, is unique to Earth. Of all the known planets in the universe right now, thousands of planets have been surveyed by NASA. Only one has life on it. I want to say one more thing about all this. One of the things that Pesach and Marcus and myself are finding, which kind of comes out in this interview, is that by re-engaging in a nature-connected life, immersing ourselves in nature as much as possible, we're finding a sense of physical peace and reestablishing physical alignment in our own bodies through stress relief. So every person I know has the need for physical comfort through feeling accepted and connected to the people around them. And the human world tends to make us feel not just emotional, the human world of today anyway, tends to make us feel not just emotionally overwhelmed or abused, but physically uncomfortable, and we carry that body with us. There's a thing of getting into the natural world and participating with it, observing and enjoying it, that allows you to relax and become more open. Because that's what this world is, this natural world. It's not a place of defensiveness, tyranny, or mind games and narratives and fear. It is a place of truth and reality. The creatures here are merely trying to coexist. Some of them are exceptionally benevolent, such as the trees. They give way more than they take. And some, of course, are poisonous and some are predators. That's a small minority, And they are part of a larger biospheric system, our life support system that is self-balancing and self-correcting and net productive over eons. And what I mean by that is, as we look over the history of the development of life on Earth, we've gone from microorganisms to the current era of macroorganisms, you could say, with the microorganisms underneath. Earth did not start out as a planet with humans on it. All of our religions and science believe this. And it is the return, or the Teshuvah, the return to this connectedness to each other and the other life on Earth, of getting out of the indoors, where only humans reign, and into the outdoors, that can help you access your truer identity. Pesach talks about this as liberation. There's a lot to be said about our kind of current way of life, of work, and then sitting and watching Netflix and chilling and relaxing and de-stressing through entertainment and media, but there's a lot more to be said for being in a place that allows you to explore and be who you really are, in community with others, and to work together, as Marcus's teams do, to discover new things about each other and the miraculous living world. And it just spirals up from there. So thanks so much for checking this out. We hope it stimulates your own investigations. Here is last night's broadcast. All right, everybody, welcome. What we want to do in this event with you here is provide an introduction to some revolutionary ideas, I think, for all people living in civilization today, about our separation from nature and our reconnection to nature, all of the non-environmental things that come from reconnection. This idea of reconnecting to nature being more beneficial than just growing food and just saving the planet, so to speak. I think we're opening up tonight, honestly, with this paper by Pesach and with Marcus's work, a new era of thinking and conversation that is about accessing our positive potential as human beings through reconnection to nature. So I'm going to share first my sort of reading between the lines summary on Pesach's paper and ask him to respond. And then from there, we'll just talk through the many compelling points about that aspect of the paper. And then in part two, we're going to ask to hear from Pesach and Marcus about what's also stated in Pesach's paper, this idea of reclaimed connection to the lands, connection to land life, to indigeneity, that this is perhaps universally accessible. And in fact, Marcus's work really shows us that this experience is generating deep healing and space for compassion and growing self-confidence and moving people into a better state. So we're going to get into all this. I want to say one more sort of plug here. Please read the paper when you have a moment. It is an elegantly written piece of scholarship. And as well, check out Marcus's work. His team just won a $750,000 grant to expand what they're doing in one of the least food resourced parts of the country. I think Marcus said a moment ago that North Minneapolis, where he lives and works, is the 4th worst food desert or something like that in the United States. So, okay, Pesach, here's my quick summary. In part one here, Pesach has identified the separation that occurred for Jews from nature. So in other words, I would say, Pesach, that we forgot, and that you have made this reconnection, that we forgot that the temple is a metaphor for homelands. It's the place where Jews went when they could not be on their homelands, living in a sacred life. And secondarily, because the Jewish exile over 2,000 years ago was out of literally the most prolific and abundant part of the Fertile Crescent, where there was a lot of food and water and natural materials and ecological infrastructure. They were exiled from that place of abundance into the desert, a place of almost the opposite experience. And as mentioned before, Pesach's expertise is in ecopsychology. And so he's particularly aware of how that shift in literal environment that these people were in perhaps created a more adversarial relationship for practitioners of Judaism and nature. And at the same time, they were already sort of forced into a practice of ritualizing their Judaism into an institutionalized religion in a temple that was a metaphor for homelands. And so there is a deep, deep connection to indigeneity in the Jewish identity, the Jewish ancestral identity. And that's how I read this first breakthrough piece of the paper. Pesach, can you kind of jump in and comment from there?
Sure, Chris. Yeah. So I probably wouldn't have phrased it exactly how you did. But I think that's really on point. I can share just a little bit of my exploration around the topic. So I don't have any official formal training in Jewish studies, in rabbinic studies whatsoever. But about, gosh, maybe a dozen years ago, I was asked to teach 11 and 12-year-olds in a synagogue. Again, no kind of background except for, growing up Jewish. And so I learned a lot through, taking on that opportunity. And over the years, for various reasons, I kept on having opportunities to teach in Jewish religious schools, and did a lot of exploration myself, in diving into texts, through showing up to Jewish religious experience, which I didn't. I grew up with a bit, a lot of Jews, at least in the U.S., as I would imagine, is similar with folks of other religious traditions. Kind of show up to synagogue a couple times a year, maybe practice a couple of holidays, but don't really have a deep connection or understanding. And so I've just been a student. I've just been, curious to learn with others and on my own. And then also about a dozen years ago, I started a graduate program in community liberation and eco psychology, and I had the privilege to really explore a lot through that program. And within, the different classes that I would take in eco psychology, in liberation psychology, a lot of my work was exploring both Jewish dynamics and connection and disconnection to land. And so that sort of resulted in a couple of fieldwork projects, and those are really what I explore in the paper. Is my trip to Israel Palestine, which included 10 days of volunteering on Palestinian farms and really trying to gain a sense. I similarly to not really growing up with a whole lot of connection to Judaism, I also didn't grow up with a whole lot of connection to the land. And at about age 27, really felt that need. And so I had the opportunity to really experience permaculture, farming, and really tried to learn how Palestinians are using that modality as sort of a response to occupation. And then shortly after returning from that trip, the next year, I was doing field work in Jewish environmental summer camps and spent about a year mentoring in a Jewish rites of passage and wilderness exploration program with an organization called Wilderness Torah. And so that's the other piece that I really explore in the paper. And so kind of the thread that I use to tie all of those together is this concept of Teshuvah, which oftentimes is translated as repentance, but I feel like a lot of us don't really connect to that concept, right? It's related to this idea of sin, which a lot of us might reject. And so, to really dig into that concept, the etymology of that word teshuvah, it means to return, right? And so we talk about it a lot during the Jewish high holidays in terms of returning to, our spiritual essence, right? And so I was really looking at the practice of teshuvah, the practice of returning, and how we can apply that to our relationship to land, to our relationship to each other, and really discovering what it could look like to take a Jewish approach and an psychological approach, and put them together. There's some really great work out there, but not enough. And so, again, my work and my exploration was really just out of my own curiosity and my own opportunity to really put myself as an object of research and discover what would come up as I was getting in touch with both my ancestral heritage and getting connected to the natural world.
Beautiful. Yeah. Marcus, did you want to comment?
Well, I can definitely relate to that journey, because I think I found a lot of the things I was looking for myself in nature. I mean, I've always been drawn to nature. I grew up here in Minneapolis, but I left and joined the military, and I right after I turned 16. I graduated early. By 17, I was in boot camp and traveling around the world and experiencing things that I never see. Being on open water and going from continents and countries. Realizing that most of the boogeymen I've heard about look like me. It's pretty interesting. And then really start accepting myself, because a lot of older people that I encounter throughout my life has always installed this sense of wisdom in me, from different cultures, different product of a lot of different people. And my father, actually every first son in my family has been a farmer. My dad was born in West Africa. They own hundreds of acres of land, growing rubber and fruits and sugarcane and rice and all these things. And that knowledge is slowly dissipating from my family. I found myself here not by choice. I don't even know how I got here, but I realized I was really good at farming. It was my medicine. It was my escape from like this world, from this our society. I really kind of isolated on farms, trying to be around like-minded people, just kind of growing and seeing like the fruits of our labor, being land stewards, and as a musician, I would tour, play music when the sun is up, and then every chance I got, I grew something. And then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I started learning by my father and his degree in agriculture and his father, and all these things. So I can relate to that journey of like, really everything that's happening right now comes from me really digging inside myself, the time I spend in nature, really absorbing my own thoughts, finishing my own thoughts, my own feelings, feeling my own feelings, asking myself questions and trying to process what's happening to me in America.
Can we come back to that in this second part? Because I think that's, exactly right. Like the transformation and the place to process and get
Exactly. I can definitely
also
relate to
ask,
his.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was saying I can definitely relate. I mean, his journey, not being someone who intended to be an expert or anything on this stuff, but really applying his own life to this process and being a vessel, and hopefully using that opportunity for people outside of his body to see the kind of quality of life, or like the things they want for themselves.
Marcus, I'm going to interrupt because this is where your expertise as a practitioner like gets us where we want to go in a sense.
Nice.
In the conversation. And I want to ask Pesach a couple more questions about the text and some specific quotes, and then we'll get back into more of where you just were, I think. Because again, it's this healing power conversation that is kind of the subtext here that I see, your life having demonstrated, and then your work demonstrating, and Pesach having experienced, as he was sort of saying through in search for identity and so forth. But I want to talk about that after we ask Pesach a few questions about these various quotes he chose. So let me go back to that for a minute. And so Pesach, here's a couple that I think really frame the significance of this this separation from nature idea of being a thing that we can absolutely say happened. So here's one of the quotes. You say, as Ben Steen wrote, and this is a quote from Ben Steen, the spiritual sophistication of the Jewish people came to be seen embodied precisely in our ability to dispense with a homeland of soil and borders and to live instead in the world at large or in the text. And then you also say, maybe the next paragraph, for thousands of years, we have been taught to focus on the words that were given rather than the place in which they were given. Can you talk about that a little bit, Pesach?
Sure. I should pull up this exactly what you're talking about so I can get the dates right. But and again, this is my study from scholars, from experts, and I'm really a layperson on these topics, and so I'm not promising to be 100% accurate, but my understanding is that um, up until the year 586 BCE, the experience of the ancient Israelites was surrounded around the ancient temple. And now, what's left of that temple in Jerusalem is the Western Wall. There's one, and it's not even a wall from the temple, but it's sort of the external barrier. And so, when that temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, they sent the vast majority of Israelites into exile in the larger Babylonian Empire. And a lot of Judaism was developed during that period and changed a lot because those individuals no longer had access to the temple, where certain secretive rites were happening, sort of animal sacrifice, right? The types of practices that we no longer practice. 70 years later, the Israelites were allowed back into their ancestral homeland. They rebuilt the temple. And so for another 500 years or so, they were to some extent continuing to practice those rituals. And then the Romans destroyed the temple in the year 70 of the Common Era. And at that point, the rabbis no longer having access, the rabbis are teachers. Rabbi means teacher, right? And so the religion went from a practice of priests, of priestly rites, to a practice of teaching. So there was this focus on the Torah, right? We in the synagogue these days have this really amazing scroll all over the world. It's exactly the same. Scholars take great care in writing this scroll, and there's such an emphasis in the Jewish world of reading both the Torah, which is the five books of Moses, the other books of what some would consider the Old Testament, and extensive commentary, the Mishnah and Gemara and all these books that the rabbis read and study over and over again, and that young Jews in school will read and debate about. And we inherit all of these amazing stories, and those of us all who are in the Western tradition know many of these stories, right? The Exodus story of Moses, perhaps some of the other stories of the forefathers like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so just to respond to that quote that you offered, Chris, um, Judaism is seen to be a result of innovation of those early rabbis, of needing to adapt from a people focused on this central temple and these ancient rituals, and instead really become focused on laws. And you can look at the example of the way that religious Jews observe Shabbat, the Sabbath. There's so many laws, right? And that's so much the central of the centrality of the religion today is focus on the laws, on textual study, on debate. And many would argue that despite the importance of those rituals, we simultaneously have lost a connection with the earth. And I think that again, those of us in the Western tradition, and those of us really across the globe from every tradition, have lost a connection to the earth. And so my interest that I'm exploring in this paper is where in our tradition, in our stories, both, what I would call the myths of the Torah, but also of maybe these more recent stories of Hasidic masters, like where can we find experience of connection to the earth? And so one example that I explore is Rabbi Nachman of Breslov was known for the practice of hitbodedut, which really is time alone outside speaking to the divine. And so,
Mm.
some of us, I think, who have connection to the earth can relate to that when we're outside, especially, under trees, especially, under the night sky, we can really access spirituality in a way that's very different from how we might do under a roof, reading. It's really different. And so just to wrap up, sometimes when I'm at the synagogue for a Shabbat service and there's a period where, it's an individual prayer, right? And people are reading, I put my book down and maybe they're reading for 5 minutes or so, and I just like run outside and I do my own prayers under the sky. And I get just a minute in that service of that practice of hitbodedut.
Let me ask you one more thing about this. There's a quote here. I don't know the word and the reference that takes that even maybe a little more specifically. You talk about leading Hasidic mystics and their disciples spent time in nature to cleave to the divine, while the vast majority of the world's Jews read the stories of our ancestral figures. Nomads who had numinous experiences in the wilderness, we have by and large lost the sense that we too might experience devekut. What is devekut?
So
Is that
that's
unique to nature? There's also this great line in your writing where you say, is it possible that our evolution towards being, quote, the people of the book has left us lacking a connection with the potential raw awesomeness of spiritual experience often occurring in the outdoors, in the wilderness? So yeah, so what is devekut? Is that only available outdoors? What does that sort of mean?
it is not. It's just generally understood as, the word that I use here is cleaving, right? Cleaving to the divine. Um, there's sorry, I was just trying there's similar words in
Beautiful, it's
different
beautiful sounding language,
traditions,
and cleaving is such a powerful word. So yeah, go ahead, talk about that.
right? And again, I think that it's interesting to juxtapose the experience of having a tradition that is very much focused on prayers in a book with this concept of cleaving. Like sometimes, again, I close the book and I just hug it. Not that there's necessarily anything, special about the book. It has prayers and so great, but it's just some way to kind of wrap my arms around myself, right? And um just in terms of this concept of nomads who had numinous experiences in the wilderness, we have these stories early on in the Torah of Abraham being told by this divine voice. And I love that, shawl, Marcus. That's beautiful. I would say that's another example, right? Sometimes I take my shawl and just wrap it around
Yeah,
myself, right?
right.
um Abraham is told, like, go. And the language, it's lech lecha, the Hebrew. It sort of means like go and go to yourself. And so what he does is he leaves the land of his ancestors and he just travels. And one of the first places that he winds up, and I talk about this a little bit in the article, is he winds up at Elon Moreh. And I learned from this great rabbi, Zelig Golden, who started this organization, Wilderness Torah, that I volunteered with, that oftentimes that word is translated, almost always is translated as the terebinth of Moreh. No one knows what a terebinth is, and it's just terebinth of Moreh. But when you translate Elon Moreh, and if you ask a fifth grader who knows some Hebrew, it means teacher tree, right? So Abraham leaves the land he grew up in. He goes traveling in the wilderness, and he winds up at the feet of a teacher tree at the roots, right? And so we wonder, It's not clear in the text. We wonder, what
Mhm.
did Abraham do at a teacher tree, right? We similarly know the story of Moses, you know, tending his flock of sheep and just being overcome by this burning bush, right? And some would say, oh, maybe he had some kind of special plant, the psychedelic plant that exists out there, and that's how that happened. We don't really know, but there's so many stories, and I can point to others as well. So many stories, these myths in the Jewish tradition, where the connection with the divine happens outside, right? And we talk about these myths as if that was something that happened in ancient times.
As if it used to mean something.
Right. And now we don't do that, right? Now we just talk about it. And so the opportunity that I'm presenting, the horizon that I think this approach brings is, what could it mean to meld our spiritual traditions and the stories, the opportunities, the possibilities that they present to actually being outside. If I know that this happened to my ancestors, to the myths in my tradition, could I potentially also be able to experience divinity just because I get out there, because I lech lecha? And you know, in my experience, yes. In my experience, it really did require first just being outside, spending more time, you know, on my parents' balcony as a teenager, and through the years on my own balcony, or just wandering in the forest, or you know, just getting out there. And that's where the divinity happens in my experience, much more than either reading or being under a roof. Although it can happen there, Devekut can happen anywhere where we let the divine in. But the wilderness, and I'd be curious to hear, you know, how others on this call experience that too. But the wilderness, it makes it, I think, really accessible.
Yeah, beautiful. Marcus, if you want to jump in, I mean, I have a bridge over, but that's really a great bridge to this idea that there are non-environmental benefits to connecting to the other life on the lands around us, and the spirituality of our ecosystems. Do you want to comment, Marcus?
Well, I think it's all a part of it. I think it's all one thing, right? So I think everything this way is one thing, and it's interesting. Like so one of the most impactful people in my life was a man. He's still alive. He's in Israel right now. His name is Avri Ziv, and he owned a business here. Um, uh, you know, selling and designing emergency lighting systems. And Aubrey pretty much taught me how to take myself seriously. And one thing he installed in me is, you know, like you were just saying, you know, the stories. I grew up in a very religious household. Um, and I think over the years, started finding my own answers, like you say, outside amongst people and plants and underneath the sky. And but one thing he told me was, you know, the Bible, or like any word written, let's consider the word of God, is literally what do you call it? Instruction menu for how to live, how to be a better version of yourself. It doesn't have to be literal. The house I grew up in, I think in many ways people took it literally, because it's just a Western thing. You know, you do all the sin during the week, and then Sunday you're forgiven for it or something. You know, whereas there's another old man that lives across the street from here, and his name is Dean. He's an old Vietnam War vet, and he's like it's like a father to me, you know. And he's Muslim, but he told me that sin has a source. The word itself, you know, before it was sin, he says, all it was is a scenario. Anything you can possibly imagine is a sin. And I really he threw me off a little bit. I have like pretty crazy conversations just being in gardens and in community and walking around in this intergenerational and cultural mix of things. I've created like some form of wisdom in me, but I always keep those things they tell me like very close, and I walk, alone in nature, really processing what they mean. They were here before me, they must know something. So it's interesting. And you have like such a deep history. There are people that have left language and information about your, generations of your people. And I find that to be rich, because I started learning about mine and I'm like, whoa, this is why I'm kind of weird. And, like a little more, I have a thing about me that's not average. Okay. And I think it's because of knowledge itself and the nothingness that I know I am. And I find that to be powerful. And all the disadvantage and things that we look at, I find to be a distraction, because all those disadvantages has become my absolute advantage. The adversity.
Living in North Minneapolis, the sort of social issues,
living in America as a Black man in my skin.
Thank you.
I served this country. I'm a decorated war vet. I've been home since my mom had a stroke. I got home and I really wanted to show her something else, than working 3-4 jobs and surviving. Most people in my community are constantly in a fight or flight, and they're constantly surviving, whether they have to move because they can't afford the cost of living in places they've been living their whole lives, or they're trying to survive from organ failure due to the amount of things they're consuming, or they're losing the size of their space because of the things they're consuming physically. Right? So like they're buying the furniture before the house and the cars and the fancy name brand and the things. And all that doesn't mean anything. I really love being a creative, because everything I have has real value. And it may not be much to the rest of the world, but I really appreciate everything I have. My life has been very blessed this way. And I would love to talk to you more about your studies, because this is like interesting. I tend to absorb information from a lot of people. And when you were talking just now, you reminded me of Avery, just because he was probably one of the most gentle human beings I've ever met, at the same time, the most direct and honest. One thing he told me is stop apologizing. Why do you apologize all the time? Told him, I don't know, because I'm sorry I got in your way. I was in your way. And his thing is like, well, if you keep apologizing for something that petty, what happens when you really mean it? I'm not going to believe you. And that sat with me for the rest of my life. The best gift anyone could ever give me is to be honest and be direct with me. I really value simple things like that,
I want to jump in because I think I can tie that exceptionally important point to the conversation you and I were having, Marcus, on the phone an hour ago. Yeah, and in a sense, one of your main themes is you're talking about your work with youth. It's always about being honest, talking to them, from a direct place.
Well, it's based on trust too. Like they trust me to be of direction. I think nowadays people are taking that phrase, get down to their level and meet them where they are a little bit too literally, because I want my teachers to know something.
There's so much respect in this honesty you're talking about for yourself, the person you're trying to communicate with. It's about building, like you said earlier about
building. Is they look at me for direction, or like as a place of safety. It's a very spiritual thing for us. Like I try to take away the trauma that's been installed in us, and when they come to our space, we create these spaces as safe spaces. They're tools. Farms, gardens.
Yeah, you mean the farms and the gardens are the safe spaces?
Yes. they're all tools in inner cities for me and the children that run around with me. Is I want them to come there. I want them to be free to fail without feeling like the world is ending. I want them to be able to talk to me like I'm their equal, because I'm literally looking for them to take my job because I'm not married to it. And I want them to be able to go around the world and have conversations with like-minded people about, the experiences they had learning life, learned skills in places like North Minneapolis in their nothingness, not based on what they paid for. This is not, now this is starting to become more transactional. What I've been doing on the ground, it seems like everyone is looking for a job and things like that. But what they don't realize is what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get us all to lift so we don't need a job. That's the point
Let
of
me cut in
nature.
and give listeners a little more context. What we were talking about earlier also was this idea that you and I, and probably Pesach, are musicians, and we sort of
Oh,
seek this visceral value. We seek meaning in our lives, and we seek these real connections. And so, this is what I hear you talking about in a way. It's like that's all here. All of that stuff is rich in the garden.
that's nature. Nature is abundance. There's enough room and space for everybody. And it's funny that to think that there are people that try to control how much you have access to or who is allowed and who isn't. In Minnesota, I forgot the number of farmers there are in Minnesota, but how many of them are Black, and why aren't there that many Black farmers? And things like that. But like I was telling you before, the reason why I feel like I'm able to be a part instead of aim to control or be the boss or whatever, is literally because of the creative part of me. I come from a place where I've always been a part of rhythm or harmony. When I was sad, I was singing. When I was happy, I was singing. When I'm sitting on the phone with you, I'm sitting with a guitarelli. There's a banjo somewhere and other things. And it's always been that way for me. So any process I'm invited into, I'm listening and I hear it. And it's not because I'm the best musician, it's because I'm listening and I'm willing. So the best things come out of the coalition of the willing this way. And the process, the end result is to get to the end on the same frequency. And I feel like that's what we're lacking when we take, I was telling you earlier that the artist mind and spirit is the same as an indigenous or a village concept to me, just because what was the scenario I used? I was like, well, a guy digging a well in a village doesn't divide up the jobs for who brings the shovel and who pours the water or who's like making the food. Everyone jumps in. Some people make the food, some people set the table, some people pour your water, but the end result is we hit that aquifer and we have water.
And the other thing you were saying was that big picture is the main idea here. Everyone's part of the same big picture. That is what's happening in this Teshuvah, the time Pesach spent with the youth he's worked with, maybe also when you went over to Gaza Strip. I'm going to interrupt you, Marcus, and ask Pesach to jump in and talk some more, maybe about that experience, going to Gaza Strip with a lot of these feelings. I mean, again, Marcus, you're like so evolved in your ability to articulate where this takes people and how it helps people. So I want to come back to you again in a second and hear Pesach talk a little bit about that emotional experience in Gaza Strip and the sort of compassion that came through this reconnection to the land in a new way. And we're really now. I'll say one more thing. We're definitely deeply in part two. We transitioned well into that, almost exactly on time. But
we're just flowing.
We're flowing. But I'm calling this part two for the listeners. This is the power of reconnection. So Pesach had a reconnection, and one of the stories he tells, personal stories he tells in this autoethnography essay, is about how he went into Gaza Strip as a Jew and basically said, "I'm sorry, I love you," and I'll let you take it from there.
Thanks, Chris. There was something that I heard you say a few minutes ago, Marcus, that I want to respond to. Before I do that, I just want to clarify. I was in the West Bank, not Gaza Strip, and I just
Mm,
clarify that because
I'm
those
sorry.
territories are very different, and
yeah.
I'm not um, gonna get into it because I'm not an expert there. But the West Bank is an occupied territory, fairly close to also the Palestinian territory of East Jerusalem, and and I had an awakening um, end of my senior year in college, which I talk about in the article, and I just realized that I needed to contribute in that land and do something and do something with land, and I didn't know exactly what that would look like. But what I want to respond about that you said earlier, Marcus, was this this concept of sin, right? And I think that so many of us don't really relate to it. It feels very it's very judgy, right? It's very make wrong. And I grew up as a Jewish kid hearing that word, but as a teacher of Jewish youth, I would always explain to them that the better translation for the Hebrew word, which is usually translated as sin, is chet. And really what it means is missing the mark.
Hmm.
And the solution to missing the mark that I'm talking about in this article is teshuvah, is returning, right? If I'm trying to be right there and I
Yeah.
go here, all I got to do is come back,
Right.
right? And so I'm hearing that in what you're saying in working with youth as a guide, right? And helping them not to necessarily feel bad about missing the mark, but it's just like just learn how to come
Correcting.
back,
Yes.
right? And I appreciate that. Like, don't apologize for everything because sometimes you really need to. And in the Jewish tradition and around this holiday of Yom Kippur, where you really see this word teshuvah, there is an emphasis on apologizing, on repentance, on making amends. And so I do think that that's an important component sometimes. And so, that's what you were referring to, Chris, was I was trying to discover with this burden that I carried around um, Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories, how could I, in my little way, feel like I was making amends? And for me, just in the own little way that I could, oh, I can help to water these plants on this Palestinian farm, right? There's all kinds of actions by Israeli settlers and military of cutting down plants in Palestinian lands, which, by the way, both goes against, and I talk about this, both goes against Israeli law and Jewish religious law, but it's a
It was intentionally abusive and destructive for, yeah, all the wrong
pretty
reasons.
effective technique of colonization. And so for me to just be able to tend to these olive trees was huge. And I remembered this mantra that I learned from a book. It's a Hawaiian practice, ho'oponopono. And the way I learned it is simply, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. And so again, that's a way when I've taught Jewish youth, how do we do teshuvah? How do we, miss the mark and come back? Um, that's a real simple way. The other thing I just want to share quickly, I do in addition to having a Jewish practice, I have a Muslim practice, a Buddhist and yoga practice. I'm pretty interfaith myself, and I happened to be at the mosque last Friday for Juma, and as I'm leaving the mosque, I see that the building right next to it, it's a little mosque, the historic West Side in Vegas, historically black community. There's a building next to it, and there's this beautiful tree, and at the roots of the tree is all this trash. It's like, man, we just got done praying, and then I'm looking, and there's all this trash under the tree. And I admit, I didn't do anything. I just got in my car and left, right? But it just occurs to me that one thing we can do if we are expressing care for God's creation, for the holiness of the earth, I don't have to get mad at anybody. I don't have to nothing, but I could just go and pick up that trash, right? I could just make that amends, do that teshuvah just in the little way, and it doesn't have to be like going across the world and trying to make a difference on some other people's existence. It could just be in
It
my
doesn't have
own
to be very
little
hard at all.
corner. Right. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
just, that's and so I'm hearing that again, Marcus, with your teaching of youth with gardening. It's like just such a great opportunity to coach or guide around, like, how do you get back on
It's
track?
everything. It's literally medicine. And when you talk about that tree, the biggest part of my summer is literally picking up our environment. So we got to prep spaces and create. So like I just give the lecture on this where I was talking about healthy environments, and it's like everyone feels like they're entitled to one in America. But what they don't understand is this is nature, and in nature you have to create a healthy environment. That's why we have predators and prey, and things in the dark lurking, and things in the light. We got to create an environment to be a part of those things. And I tell people, like, what if you planted all these watermelons and someone come and smash them? What, don't you that make you angry? It's like, well, no, we just plant them back. And if I find out who did it, I give them an opportunity to give back. So maybe they put it back. This is all a part of programming. There's no need for reaction. But there's something you said that was like that resonated with me, and it was about reconciling and returning. So this is a problem we've been having here in America for the longest. Between this idea of white and black. Only in America do we have this duality: right, wrong, better, worse, winner, loser, white, black. And one thing I know about my community is like there's a very little trust because of the historic narrative when it comes to like institutions, when it comes to dominant perspective and white supremacy, and how it just predatory things just kind of take over the entire existence of people that look like me. I mean, they're every day, they're moving, trying to get further and further away or closer and closer to their rest. And I think that's that's the impact of slavery in this country, and what happened to Black people in this country, what's still happening to Black people in this country. And I have these conversations with people around culture building, right? It's not really focused on the white and Black part. It's just really us, comes from the word community, right? Means one, only from one can come two, right? And we talk about reconciliation, and people talk about reparations and all these things. And to tell you the truth, while Black people will love an opportunity to catch up economically in this country or have opportunities to actually create their own possibilities, all they really need is to be protected, and for people to acknowledge that the impact of systematic oppression in this country is real. It's not equal to anything. It's not equal to anything in this country. I don't understand it. So when we talk about reconciliation and self-correct, and this is the part of it where this is how I got to nature, is because I decided that I didn't need that. I got tired of arguing that, is this really happening to me? Am I like a well-decorated person being thrown on the ground on my face right now with no apologies afterwards? Just pick up your stuff and leave, right? And I start seeing people that look like me becoming an interpretation of that same oppression, all to feel safe, to have control. But the only place I found control was nature. It was where I could go and scream out loud, and it's an empty void, and it's also full, and everything felt it. And I became a part of everything. It's where I could cry, it's where I could laugh, it's where I could process what's happening here on a human level, and how to approach people, because we're all a little bit sick in my community. So I approach everyone.
Let me jump in to say, like, you're a process person. This is what part of your practicing message is, first and foremost, like relationships and process. And then I'm also curious though about where you are right now and what you're talking about, your kind of personal story where you came from wherever you were to where you are now
Yeah.
through the
So,
nature engagement. Because
yeah,
now
well,
you're a leader
I
in Minneapolis. You just had this meeting today where you secured this food policy for the whole city. And,
yeah,
you
we're
have various things going on. You're a leader, but you weren't for a long time, probably. You had to
well,
get
yeah. I mean, I found, I didn't name myself that. I think people have given me that title as a community leader or like a food champion. And with the help of all these people on the Homegrown Food Council here in the city of Minneapolis, I've been able to grow and learn a lot more about what's happening to me and what's happening in our food systems. But
do
the
you feel
idea
better
of
when you've taken
reconciliation,
your experience of healing in the garden in nature where you can yell and cry and laugh and shared that with the youth that you're working with today? Is that, you
I'm
know,
trying to share that with my entire environment. Anyone who is willing, I'm here for, and everyone is invited here. And I think I found that level of humility and like just a passion for what I do um, during despair. I don't want kids growing up experiencing anything I have. I don't want to pass my trauma on and be stuck in this idea that I'm lesser than. But what I want to do is enjoy myself as I am, and I share it with everyone. And it just so happened that my environment has seen and absorbed and accepted that for what it is. Just like it's okay for there to be people that thinks that I'm not human. But the idea of reconciliation is where I am, because I've had this conversation this week. This is great. And we're going to have more of this conversation because I don't know how to explain how to reconcile. I don't need reconciliation when it comes to the historic narrative. What I need now is the ability to spend the rest of my life enjoying and producing and creating my own healthy environment. And that will impact everyone around me and give them the same opportunity if I can actually stay focused and not be distracted by, the trauma of it all. And it's here. All I can do is hold people, and we cry together and talk and laugh together and be present. Not present for a reason, for money or some kind of expertise, but just because we're being. And I've been trying to figure out how to approach this idea of reconciliation, because I don't really feel like any, body is like currently responsible for, I don't think it's a one person or one kind of people responsible for some of the trauma inflicted on Black people in this country presently. I think the historic narrative this is what it was. And we're living in a system designed to uphold that history. And everything I'm doing is fighting that narrative and trying to be honest, look the people upholding that history and hiding behind, like their false sense of superiority. I want to be able to name the impact of it on me and move on. I don't have the ability to hate anybody. I think that's too heavy of a thing to bear for anyone. But it's so deeply rooted in my culture that I really, I'm sympathetic to like Black people in this country, and everything I'm doing is to hold them high and try to lift the spirit. And that the land is giving me the tools and the ability to do that. And every time I see their faces, I see God. I see whatever thing you worship, I see. And nature has given me the ability to understand what that looks like. And I am learning constantly, especially from younger people. This intergenerational thing is actually the best form of education I can ever imagine. So when you said reconciliation, it just kind of like awoke, and it woke up that conversation I had recently. And I told these people, I don't know what they were like, well, what does reconciliation, how do we start over and get back? And it's like, can you? Um,
Or how do we move forward together?
how do we move forward? That's the thing now. We don't want to
That's
move
what
sideways or backwards.
gardening really. I'm going to interrupt Marcus also because we want to invite people to Q&A.
Yeah. How
So
about that?
if you'd like to ask a question, maybe let us know in the chat, and then we'll open up your mic in a moment. And yeah, let me actually.
I just want to say, I really love the narrative of reconciliation in your experience um, through all your practices, because I think there is something there of substance and the truth that really needs to be heard. And I don't think is a, just a Jewish thing. I think it's a human thing. I think that's your study. I
Absolutely.
really appreciate that about you. I can't wait to talk to you more. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Look, that's a great way to time. We don't have any questions popping up yet in the chat. So I'm going to read another summary from the paper for both of you guys to sort of comment on, and maybe this will spur a question or two. And it relates directly to what you just said, Marcus. So this is going back to Pesach's paper. And I kind of highlighted 4 key words here. The words are place, possibility, universal, and indigenous. And so we can maybe sort of land here. And here's the quotes. The one you've heard, and it'll frame the other 3. For thousands of years, we have been taught to focus on the words that were given rather than the place they were given, from Rabbi Korngold. And then Rabbi Komen says something that sounds a lot like Marcus. Says Pesach's framing of this inquiry into place and selfhood presents a profound possibility, an exploration, and then here's the quote, of the awesome mystery of the things we are usually moving too fast to see, during which time we acquire a profound respect for the plants and animals we come to know intimately. Yeah, that sounds like Marcus. And then, and then here's a great quote that is Pesach sort of framing eco-psychology in a way from his cultural identity. Situating culture within nature, this work moves beyond the particular cultural experience of diasporic Ashkenazi Jews like myself, and verges into the perhaps universal human condition of relationship to land and psyche. And then lastly, and of course, society and psyche, self and psyche, but land is this element we have excluded in our, Western narrative, or biosphere, I would say in my language. And then the 4th quote here, to your point again, Marcus, in today's world, Jews have the opportunity to make any locale their axis mundi, to become indigenous anywhere on earth.
Yes.
So I see you exemplifying that. I hear you saying that. I'd love to hear, Pesach, if you want to comment on that summary. I know I kind of read it slowly, but we have 15 more minutes here to kind of talk through these ideas of indigeneity and so forth.
Not sure where to start except to say that, I appreciate, Chris, you reading some of the quotes that I borrowed from others, because, so much of this work was from my own exploration and, my own fulfilling of my curiosity, and then just kind of like stringing together what I learned from
It's an
others.
incredible threading that you do, bringing all these elements together, I think.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate that. It's been fun over the years to do that, right? To figure some of this stuff out. And so, that quote from Rabbi Cummins is him talking about that practice of heat bodedut. And the exploration that I had there was, when we're training, like the practice, one of the practices that we were teaching these 11 and 12-year-olds who happen to be Jewish kids to do, is to be able to sit outside at the foot of these huge redwoods or what have you, and just be there for minutes, right? Maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And then sometimes I've liked to we have this great, I wish I brought my ram's horn, but we have this great ram's horn that makes this awesome sound that's usually only blown a couple times in the Jewish year. But I would tell these kids, when you hear the sound of our ancestors, you can come back. And so they would just be on their own out, they'd find a spot. And so it's this like we're always moving so fast, right? We're always looking in the way. I have my phone right here. I'm always looking at my phone like this close, right? I'm typing fast, but when I can get out into the wilderness, I can just be at such a slow pace, right? And I can just experience the relaxation of seeing the wind move through the trees. And I'm really blessed, privileged, and grateful to have that, you know, to learn how to do that in my
Mm.
20s and 30s. And so to be able to invite 11 and 12-year-olds to get that is just like a phenomenal gift. And like the work that you're doing, Marcus, of working with young people and helping them to see that like way earlier than we did, I think is huge. And so yeah, just to go back to that point, um I just happen in this paper to talk about the Jewish experience, because that's one of the things I was exploring in my graduate studies and one of the identities that I have. And it's just kind of like the land, like my access point. But really, all the practices that I share are accessible to everybody. Um, and it's really our shared connection to the earth and our shared connection around food is one of the
Mm.
things. And I'd say the third, maybe, I mean, there's probably a few things that all humans can relate to, right? Food, we live in land as long as we can acknowledge it. And I think the other one is dreams. We all have dreams. We all sleep. And so that's kind of my background is in depth psychology, which like first and foremost is very much about dreams. And I was just sharing with my wife, like most of us humans, we don't share about dreams, right? We feel like really, I think, intimidated to talk about our dreams with each other and to talk about our relationship to land or disconnection to land with each other. And so yeah, I'm
Yeah.
just interested in exploring the practices that I've discovered and how we can all connect on getting reconnected to the earth, to the natural, the more than human or other than human world.
Let me ask one more thing before Marcus jumps in. Do you have a sense of indigeneity now? Would you say that you feel more of that person, feel to be more of that person? The paper begins so beautifully with you on, talking about your youth, looking at the stars from your parents' house, and trying to reconcile. This is a different type of reconciliation. This compelling sense of connection to the stars with, as Marcus is saying, the traumatic world that we live in, the world that we live in, and so now I think you have really found a very credible connection, and then you've also engaged in these practices, these new rituals, new embodied rituals. So that's what I meant. More connected, more of a sense of indigeneity now than you did as a child or something.
Yeah, for sure. So a couple things on that. One is that the time that I was writing this, it's been a while since I first started developing this work. It was like 10 years ago when I left. I grew up mostly in Las Vegas, and I had just left Vegas and moved to the Bay Area. And so I was very, I was like Abraham, Lech Lecha, like I left the land of my ancestors and went out into the wilderness that I didn't know. And I was in the Bay Area. I was in Berkeley and San Francisco, which is just so different from Vegas. So I was really, had the opportunity almost like from nothing, starting from scratch to reinvent myself, to explore identity, to get connected to the unique environment that's out there. And so, over the years I've moved a lot and I've continued to sort of like adapt to the different environments that I've been in. So that's one thing. The other thing I want to share, I'm prepared with just a couple of books. That and I only quoted this one once a bit, but Nature and the Human Soul by Bill Plotkin has been huge for me. At first I didn't understand a lot of my experience, and then when I read this book, I did much more. And he talks about eco awakening, how many of us have this experience of awakening to the natural world, and in hindsight, that is what happened to me when I was on my parents' balcony, or even taking the trash out at night in my little suburban community and just seeing the vastness of the sky, there was an eco awakening. And Plotkin talks about how that's sort of the first step in coming to terms with our own unique soul experience. And he really talks about how getting connected to nature is essential in getting connected to our, he calls it soul or mythopoetic unique eco niche. And so yeah, over the last 10 years through my exploration of nature and psyche, I do feel like I have really gotten kind of clear about who I am, and I'm still discovering that. And you know, the last thing I'll say about that, and again, Plotkin talks about how there's certain kind of tasks of each part of our lives that we need to meet, and really that middle childhood, you know, from like age 4 or 5 when we sort of develop our ego selves, through puberty, it's really important to have a connection to the natural world, and I really didn't. And so it was at age 27, 28 when I kind of filled in that gap. And a big part of that for me was getting involved with Wilderness Torah and mentoring these 11 and 12-year olds. And even though I was, you know, more than twice their age and I was a mentor for them, on some level, I was on the same journey of connection to nature with them. And I was really intimidated when I first started going camping and getting myself just real vulnerable in the wilderness. And just the impact, the positive impact that had on my psyche is tremendous.
Okay, Marcus, I want to pass that over to you because you know, there's so much going on in this conversation, but the sort of one of the strong that links to what I hear you saying about being Black in this culture, and what Pesach just said, this experience of being in wilderness, in nature, engaging with kids and as a mentor, all that led Pesach into, if I'm quoting you correctly, Pesach, or paraphrasing you, like a stronger sense of your own identity. You feel like stronger in yourself now. Okay, Pesach's nodding. And then Marcus, we talked earlier a few days ago, you were talking about one of your kids calling you from college or whatever and telling you how he's managing this really rough situation. And when you talk about that to me, I hear you talking about these kids have developed life skills through the stronger sense of identity, through the relationships, through the process, all the stuff that you're about.
It's funny, you know, like just to connect, you know, with what you said previously, it's funny, the dynamic here, just the impact of nature on anyone from every different walks is the same. If you really, there's no, like, your experiences in nature is exactly what I'm aiming to do here in North Minneapolis, is balance out the benefits of nature, because that balance has been tilted, right? So my kids are learning how to feel their feelings in green spaces, how to really process what's happening to them instead of reacting, right? Whereas you're talking about going camping and your love for being outside and stuff, but I know enough kids and Black people in this neighborhood that would not go camping, right? Because of their fear of what would happen if they go camping. And we're not talking about what would happen because of nature, but what would happen because of humans, the invasive species. For them, there is some trauma being alone and isolated. And I'm trying to get rid of that way of thinking, not by moving physically, but by being still here and creating a version of nature. There's organic patterns in nature. And I got to tell you, while there are like different approaches, they all have the same meaning. And I appreciate you sharing that experience growing up. And when you talk about, you know, feeling stronger as an adult now, I feel like I've always been an Indigenous person because I was raised in my mother's house. Even though I was raised in America, I had to go home. So what was happening out in the world didn't matter because my mom had installed in me the need to have respect and, you know, come home at a certain time and eat certain food. She cooked a certain food. She taught me how to cook. Kids don't know where their fries come from these days. And what we're doing is trying to give them the tools needed to actually process these things and learn how to grow everything. So the questions posed to them is like, what can you grow? Most people name plants and foods and this and that, but really, the ones that are really thinking will tell you relationships, community, possibilities, everything. And that's what I'm aiming to do here, is use food as a tool to create social change in my immediate environment. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share that with you guys. And I hope whoever watches this talk can really try to see, that while we're from two different places and two different people, we're really the same in a lot of ways. And I appreciate the fact that I had the opportunity to have met you, because I'm hoping we can build and grow from here.
Amen.
Try
Yes.
to meet
Yeah.
in the woods somewhere sometime, and play some music or whatever. I got you. And yeah, thank you for this opportunity, Chris.
Yeah, thank you for being
Yeah.
here with us.
Thank you so much, Chris and Marcus, and for your help, Katie. I'm in Vegas. Chris, you're in Austin, right? And Marcus, you're in Minneapolis, and so
Yeah,
we're all over the
all over the
country, really.
place.
And
Yeah,
maybe at some point we meet in person and do exactly what you said. Yeah,
let's go to all the places. We're good.
right. Love it, love it.
Yeah.
That sounds
Thanks so
great.
much, y'all.
Yeah, thank you. Until then, we Zoom. And
Sounds good. Yeah,
I'll wrap
perfect.
this up real fast, guys, because everyone's got limited time. So I'm going to do a real quick wrap up here by saying thank you again to both of you. Thanks to Katie for helping us out. Thanks to the audience for being here. And again, to the listening people out there, this content and these two gentlemen came to me through the All Creation Project. I was editor of the most recent issue called Envisioning Transformation. And so you can go to allcreation.org to read Pesach's paper, to listen to Marcus more in depth in his interview. And I just really encourage you to do that and get on board with this fuller life experience we're having through finding our connectedness to nature in new ways that I know I didn't start my life out thinking was available. As a person raised in Christian culture. And I'm excited about this new era of connection for people of faith, people of their self-defined outlook, people who are anti-faith, secular, whatever. I think this Teshuvah and this reconnection and all these things that we're seeing in the work and in the academics, I think this is for everyone. And Pesach, you rocked it. You really changed the world with this paper, I think. And Marcus, you're changing the world every moment with these kids. And I sure hope we get a chance to interview you guys more, because you really are two of the best leaders we have in your own ways. So thanks again.
Appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you too. And everybody else, thanks for listening and tuning in. We'll see you next time.